As Tom mentioned, we're talking about the Stolls, and those of you who knew my grandmother Stoll, you know that OF calls wife that OF wouldn't be OF if it hadn't been for her, and neither would my dad or Uncle Dean or Aunt Rhoda Vaughn, Aunt Vaughn. She was a real wonderful person, very knowledgeable, very intelligent. Well, the Stolls have quite an interesting history. They came to the Stoll name. The origins of the Stoll name came in in about 1066, when it was named after Adam, who was William the Conqueror, came over into England, and as part of his pay, he was given some property that was called Stawell, and he became Adam de Stowell. And so that became the very first Stoll, if you will, or the beginning of that name. The Stolls came to the United States in about 1635, and escaping or coming for religious liberty. At first, he was a blacksmith and was involved in and came into Boston as well. Interesting to know if the Calls and the Stolls knew each other. The first, you had a Stoll who was in the war, the Revolutionary War, was Samuel Stoll. I'm sorry, it was Oliver Stoll, and he was a physician and served during the war. We'll jump forward a few generations. In fact, from the first generation, we'll go to the fifth generation. Oliver's son, whose name was Augustus Oliver Artemus, we're going to call him AOA. And he joined the church in 1833. He was was out on a ride in a wagon doing some business, and this woman was along the way and asked him for a ride. So he gave the woman a ride, and natural conversation. Where are you going? Well, she was heading to a Mormon camp, or a Mormon meeting. And she told him all about it. He said, I'll come with you. So he sent his son off, and he diverted to go to this meeting. And at which point he received the Book of Mormon, one of the very first, obviously, the first published Book of Mormon, which he then read for the next 2 months, twice. And didn't say anything to anybody, and at the end of 2 months, he said, this is as true as the Bible. And he was baptized, as with several of his family members. A few months later, that was in the spring, in the fall, there were some folks came around looking for people to go on the Zion's camp. And Augustus was quite a patriot, and he felt like that the Mormons were setting up something that was anti-government, and he didn't want to have anything to do with it, and he didn't want anything to do with anything that had anything to do with it. So he basically left the church and would not allow his family to go to church or to have anything to do with the church. This went on for about 8 years, during which time his son, William Rufus Rogers, we'll call him Will, came to his own and decided he wanted to know more about it. Because he still has testimony, his wife still has testimony. He wanted to know more about it. So he went into town, became realigned with the church, was ordained an elder, and he left to go to Nauvoo because he wanted to go meet the prophet. So on his way to meet the prophet, he was living in New York, right? So you know that's a pretty good trek. So on his way to New York, he runs into some other folks who are headed to Nauvoo, and he runs into somebody who's doing some business with the prophet and sends a message through William to the prophet. So he walks in, so he gets to Nauvoo, walks into the Nauvoo's, what do they call that, the manor house or the mansion house, walks in there, and the prophet is doing some business, he's preoccupied, and William gets his attention, gives him the message, and leaves, not terribly impressed. about his business until the next day. The next day, he passes Joseph Smith on the street. And Joseph Smith stops and says, "William, come on, let's talk." So the two of them go lean against the fence, kind of like this, the way it's described. It leans against the fence and start to talk and get to know each other. And at which point, William realizes this is a prophet, and he's caught. So he goes back and picks up. Well, actually, he gets a mission call to do a political mission call to help promote Joseph Smith's presidential campaign. And he goes back to New York. And not only is that back there, he goes and sees his mother and his father, which at this point have divorced. And he is active with her and brings her and some of his children back to Nauvoo. William is in the first group of saints who leave Nauvoo and go over and start going to Garden Grove. He goes to Garden Grove, settles there, starts a farm. Before he starts his farm, he goes back and he picks up his mom and the rest of the family in that group that go back to pick up all of the folks who don't have the money and don't have the means to leave Nauvoo. He's in that group that goes back and helps them and brings them out. And so he also brings his mom and his family. And they end up back in Garden Grove and emigrate on into Salt Lake City, arriving in about 1850. So he's there. He sets up some farms, and ultimately he takes two more wives. His first son is Brigham, and he is also very involved in the militia, and he gets captured on the campaign against the Johnson's army. He gets captured by Johnson's army and held captive in Fort Bridger, and ultimately escapes. He went on missions against the Indians. He helped build the Fillmore State House. He did a lot of freighting. He was a frontier man. And ultimately, with his wives, the Edmunds Bill created a problem for him, and he had to go into hiding. And he decided this was for the birds. And his son, also Brigham, by this point, his son Brigham had also had two wives. And they were both struggling, and they decided that this is for the birds, and we're going to go to Mexico and go to the colonies. So they immigrate, they sell everything, they immigrate, they go down to the colonies, Colonial Juarez, where William builds a grist mill, and Brigham manages cattle for the church, and Brigham is quite a character. Water was a real issue in that down there, and he had all these cattle to take care of and cows. So he had to have water for them. So he dug a well and built a big. It was a big bucket that would hold 30 gallons of water. So 30 gallons of water coming out of the well is something more than just a man can hold or can carry. So he trained a horse to pull the thing out of the ground. And the horse became so well trained he just did it by himself. And so he could provide water for all of his cattle with this contraption, where he's pulling his water 30 gallons at a time to feed all his cattle. Well, Brigham is Myrtle's dad. Myrtle was the second daughter of his second wife. And Myrtle was raised in the colonies until she was graduated from high school. And the colonies were a wonderful place to grow up. It was very much the frontier. They had to provide all of their own supplies. They had to make everything from scratch. And she became very knowledgeable in all of those skills. Left after graduation from the O'Neill Juarez Academy, and went to the Y, as she called it, in 1911. And she was with the intention of going to school. And about 1912 was when Pancho Villa and the rebels from the Mexican rebels drove the Saints out of the colonies. And actually, they drove all of the women and children went first, and so all of her brothers and sisters and her mother, all except for the older brothers, they all went to El Paso and were put in a refugee camp. Myrtle was staying with her sister, who had married a Romney, and the Romney, Eustace Romney, went down and got the family and brought them up, and they all then started to take a residence in Provo. Money was very tight. Brigham, the father, had ultimately stayed in New Mexico, or Arizona rather, and the family, Rhoda's family, Rhoda was her mother, all went to Provo. And money was very tight, so Myrtle, instead of going to college, she went out and got a job teaching school and helped to support her family. Her school that she was teaching at was 4 miles away, and they didn't have any transportation. So she rented a horse. And one of her brothers would go with her on the horse in the morning and then bring her back. And she made the comment, it's very difficult to ride, it's uncomfortable to ride a horse with a man's saddle on, and try to do it with a woman's dress on. One day, this horse decided that it was going to be a problem, it wasn't going to get up and go. So they were working with it, trying to get it so they could get on it, so she could get to work. And the young man stopped by, he'd be walking by, and he said, can I help you with this? And he walked up and talked to the horse a little bit, and settled it, and talked to him, like a horse whisperer, right? And the horse was ready to go. Well, turns out that this young man was O.F. Call. And O.F. Call had just come to Provo to go to school. He had left Rigby, where he grew up, very much on the frontier, and had left a child from his first wife, and had come now to go to school with a dream to become a physician. So he now and Myrtle start to get better acquainted, and they start to date. And this goes on as he goes through school. Finally, he was actually the senior class president of his class here when he was a senior down at the Y. He graduates, and he has a date with Myrtle, and he brings with him his acceptance to Jefferson Medical School in Philadelphia, and an engagement ring. And that night he proposes and asks her to come with him to go to Philadelphia as his wife. So they go to Philadelphia, and I can only imagine when you have someone like O.F., who was very much in the frontier. His first grade school was rough sawn logs in a dirt hut. He had to go away to go to high school because there wasn't a high school in Rigby. And Myrtle, who grew up very much on the frontier in northern Mexico. For those two now to go to Philadelphia and be immersed in the life of the big city had to have been a real eye-opener. There's a story of Myrtle who they needed a house, so they went out and found this apartment, but not a great part of town. And she's up on the second floor, and during the night they hear downstairs in a woman's voice where she's talking about calling so-and-so sweetheart, and then there'd be another so-and-so with a different name who was a sweetheart, and then a little while later there'd be another so-and-so who was a sweetheart. And, you know, Myrtle says, and Oil says something about a red light district, and Myrtle says, you know, I don't care if it's red light, or green light, or blue light, I just wish that we weren't so noisy here. The next day, OF went out and found her another place to live. They were in love their whole life. What a marvelous couple. She sacrificed everything for him and for her children. Her brother, some of you may know, was Grant Stoll. And Grant Stoll was in real estate here in town. He was on the city council for a while. He was served on the school board for a while. And as an ex-resident of Indian Hills subdivision, I was interested to know that he developed the Indian Hills subdivision. And his retirement was providing the water, had a water well for that, which he managed. And he was able to retire on it. He had a root beer stand on North Main. Didn't know that either. Some of you maybe were around long enough to remember going to a root beer stand in the 40s and 50s. So the Stoll family had a real impact here between Myrtle and Grant. And Myrtle was a product of a very, very solid pioneer family who sacrificed everything to come west and for the gospel. Thank you. And now we're going to talk about Flanders.